All right. Happy Friday. Happy New Year. Get rid of the waiting room here. Is it all? Hope everyone's having a great New Year.
Hello.
Hey, this. We had a good New Year's Eve hanging out. A lot of fun. Several other AutoHotkey YouTubers were there. That was a lot of fun talking to them and everyone else.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Okay. So someone in the chat, Colo, said he had a question about classes, but he said it's not a big question, so I think he's just going to try to write it out. In classes, how do you make a function accessible only inside the class?
Switch to V2. Yeah, in V1 you cannot do that. So, and even in V2, you cannot really make it completely accessible only to the class. There are other things that you can do, and probably depending on if there are any other questions, I could go ahead and give a little demonstration of what I mean. But the short answer is AutoHotkey does not have the concept of private stuff, like that only the class can access it, like private and public in other languages. But there are some things that you can restrict how you can access it, but that is only in V2. In V1, that's not a thing at all.
I'll put the text he provided, but I think you've already answered the question.
I gave a general answer, yes. So later on, if we have a little bit of time, there are not a lot of questions, I could go ahead and give a little bit more detail to that.
That's what he provided in the chat.
Okay, let me go ahead and bring that up.
I've got a quick question. If you can put me in the queue, please, Joe.
Oh, hold on. Let me. Oh, okay. There. Yeah.
Let me see what we got. So you have a second one here. Let me double check what you got. And we have the last thing. So let me see if I understand what he's
Hello, V2, just so you understand, it's not backwards compatible. It's very, very different. And if you're at all a programmer, you'll love it. You'll absolutely love it.
That's for sure. It is a little bit, it helps you as a programmer. That's
I was chatting back and forth on a video. AHK All the Way had commented on a video about VS Code, this and that. We were going back and forth and just saying how I wholeheartedly, if you're a programmer at all or want to be, V2 is definitely where you should be. Right. But for a lot of people who barely touch AutoHotkey and barely use it, V1 still might be a good,
Yeah. So let me explain more or less what's going on in here. So this is the code that he sent. You have a class number called test. You have a method called get number. And what that does is call what might be an internal function called roll 1 to 10. And that would actually do just an addition of those two numbers. So let me see. Oh, okay. So I had this duplicated here. That's all there is to
example. So just ignore it. But anyway, you can still finish your.
Yeah. So at this point, what I think he's trying to say is that he doesn't want this particular function to be accessible outside of the class, which is not a thing. so let's have a variable called roll that has a new class test. Okay, so you create an object out of that class. Let's not call it roll because there's a function called roll there. So let's call it number test, right? And test. Now let's return here, because this is the auto execute section. I don't want anything else executed on there. And if I call end test, and I can call the get number here, it would automatically try to give 11. That's the only thing that it should do, because it's just adding up 1 and 10, right? So if I have a message box there, oh, sorry, hold on. Let me make it V1. Call to non-existent function called roll, right? So this thing here, his code is not really working because he's calling this as a function itself.
I wrote it out just really as a real quick example. So
right, but let me just put this here, and what this does is that it's calling the method roll inside the class test, which is what he probably meant. Now you get 11 as I was expecting, good, but here's the problem. Outside of the code, and this is, notice that this is my variable test and test. I could call roll directly and put 2 digits there, and I will get 22 at this point. You see? So what he's trying to say is, I don't want to be able to access this roll function outside of the class. And as you can see in V1 at least, that is not a thing at all. Now, let's switch to V2. And let me explain what happens here. In V2, you have what is called static functions or methods. At this point, you can label this whole thing as static. What this does is that now for you to call roll, you cannot call it from the variable. So notice that let me just remove the new keyword from there, because in V2, you don't need that, and you don't need the percent sign anymore. Now this creates the object into that variable, but now this method called roll is not available to this variable. It's only available to the class. This will throw an error. It's going to say, hey, you cannot access that. Look, hold on, let me continue there because of the return. Let me remove this return here. Okay. It tells you, hey, this value of type test doesn't have that method called roll because this is now a static method and cannot be accessed by the variable itself. So if I remove the keyword static, I would be able to access it. But if I make it static, it will not allow that variable to access it. But that doesn't mean that you cannot access it, because I could definitely call that function as a static function like this. So now I'm calling the class method directly, not through my object that I created. So that second example should work fine. You see? But notice that I'm calling the class itself. I'm not calling the object that I created. That's what static methods do. That is a way of achieving partly what he's trying. But again, it is not that it's not accessible. It is accessible. It's just not accessible through an instance of that class. It is actually a method that can only be accessed if you call the class directly, which that's what I do in many cases. I just make some static methods like this just to, how do I say, limit how public it is. Now, another thing that you can do, and this is the correct answer to his question, is define this function inside the get number function. In V2, you can do this. In V1, you cannot. So you can define a function inside another function. And what that does now is that now I don't need the class here. That does is that this function is only available to this method. It is in an internal function for that method. Now, at that point, I do have to use my end test. I have to use the get number method. Let me remove this, right? This should work fine. So if I do this, I get 11. But there is no way for me to access the roll function at all, because even if I try to do it directly like this, let's try that. Let's make a different number just to make sure that we're trying. That should throw an error. That doesn't exist. And even if you try to use the class name here, it will also throw an error. So that way, effectively, I have created a private function only available to this method right here. That's the way to achieve what you're looking for, but it's not exactly intuitive for many people. So that way, there is no way to access the roll function with that object. And even from outside, you cannot access it like this either. So if you try to roll like this, you cannot do that either.
And
so
even from another method from the same class?
No, not even from another method from the same class. So I have another method. If I try this, return roll, let's say 2 to 30, and I try to use end test dot another method. So if I try that, I'm still gonna get an error, right? It doesn't work. And if I also try to use the class here, it will also throw an error. So again, there is no way to access the row function outside of get number. That's the only way that you can do it. And this is what is called a closure, is the technical term for this kind of, when you define a function inside another function, what you're doing is called a closure. So if you need more information about how they work, go to the documentation for V2 and look for closures, and they explain. It's really tricky. The documentation for that, it is very hard to understand. So the easy way to understand it is that if you define a function inside another function, you can only access it inside the parent. So there is no way to access that method any other way. So that's the closest that we can get to a private method or something like that.
And just real quickly, Isaias, can you just summarize what I'm just trying to, for most people, I don't think they really have an understanding of why you would want what he's asking.
Right. So there are some things that are internal to my database or to my class that I don't, or to my program, that I do not want anybody using it directly for any reason. For example, if I have an internal function called roll that is just adding up to numbers, later on, I might change that to something else. And if I make changes to this function, I don't want your script to break, because I'm giving you an interface. This method here is the one that you should use in your scripts. But this one down here might change unexpectedly. So for you, your get number will always return a number, but how I return that number might change. And I don't want you having this function in your code, because if at any point I make changes, it might break your main program. And I don't want that. I want you always to expect something very specific with this method. And that's the reason why I would want to hide some functions from your main program. This is not something that you would do in simple scripts very often. This becomes a thing once you start developing very complex libraries or classes or programs in that you're going to be sharing with other people. That's mainly the point. As soon as I'm starting sharing something there, then I want to make sure that there's some things that cannot be accessed from outside. One very clear example of that, I am developing a library that uses SQL, right? And one of my internal functions is to escape strings. The SQL library doesn't have an escape string method. And the way how I am escaping the thing is my version of it, and it might change. So I don't want you using the escape function, because it's not the standard escape function. It's not something that you should be using on your scripts whenever you want, because I might change that function at any point. So when I give you the library, you can use other methods, and the escaping is done by my library on the background. That's the idea behind it.
I think there's a word for it, and that's, oh, I forgot it, to make it complete, to make it self-contained.
Yes, it is self-containing. But at this point, what you're doing is encapsulation, which is that you're grouping certain types of data into a unit. That from the outside, that unit is always the same, and you're encapsulating the implementation of certain aspects of it in a way that does not interfere with the main program, basically.
No, you're making it self-contained. So
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Awesome.
So what was your question, guy?
A quick question. Last time you gave me some help on defining finding what a particular screen is by using the text available. And I thought it was all the same until you told me to switch hidden text on and off. And that made a huge difference. And I've nailed that now. It's really useful. However, I have a toolbar and I want the buttons to disappear depending on which screen is active. So my function will tell me what screen is active. Now, apart from polling the screen on a timer, is there a way of me to be able to have some kind of on message thing that when the screen changes, it will poll the screen?
Right. That's a good, you're thinking about the concept of events. For anybody who is programming, the problem with events is that probably the program does not have an event that you can query. I would actually do something else. There are ways, more advanced ways.
Okay.
For example, whenever you switch the tabs in your program,
yes,
there is a repainting of the screen going on.
Correct.
So there is a message called WM paint, like Windows message paint, which is a message that is sent when the screen is being updated.
Redrawn. Yeah.
You could probably use the on message function, as you mentioned, to capture the WM paint message. And when that happens, pull the screen.
Yeah. So if the window is active and the paint message comes along, there's no point doing it if the other windows are active, because other windows will be sending paint messages.
Let me clarify something. One of the issues with this approach is that AutoHotkey can only capture its own messages. You cannot capture messages from another program, probably. So there are ways that we could figure that one out, but it's a really advanced topic to capture that particular message like that from a different program. From your own script, yeah, no
it's
problem.
Easy. Yeah, from my own script, I know what's going on. I don't need to poll it.
Right, exactly.
But so the short term is, because AutoHotkey is so quick, if every 5 seconds I sent a poll to the screen saying
that's really slow, actually.
Okay.
You can have something that polls every 500 milliseconds, like half a second.
Yep.
And that's totally fine. Like that's really long term in computers time, actually.
Yeah. But from a user point of view, the users don't switch screens every half a second. But when they switch a screen, by the time they look at the screen, it takes them at least 2-3 seconds just to process in their head what screen they're looking at.
Right. That's the reason why I would go with half a second, because it takes you around 300 milliseconds to blink, right?
Yeah.
So I'm giving you time to blink and look. So that's
300
around
milliseconds is a third of a second.
Right. That's the idea. Around right now, currently, for people to blink is around 300 milliseconds. So 500 milliseconds is a good timing because if you make it 3 or 4 seconds or 5 seconds, what's going to happen is that they switch screen, and your toolbar is not going to update for at least a few more seconds. So it's kind of like a little lag in there. So I would definitely go with 500 milliseconds.
I think a more important pressing point, appropriate, is it doesn't take that much resources.
Right.
You're thinking it really is using up CPU. It really doesn't.
There's me trying to think I'm being efficient, but actually
no. At this point, 500 milliseconds is efficient enough, and it gives you time enough. But here's the point: if whenever you're polling the screen to check what screen you're on, if that function was really complex and it was polling about many things, I get it. 500 milliseconds will be too fast to do that computation over and over. But it's something that takes 10 milliseconds to do, so it doesn't really matter. When you switch 500 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds to compute, you're good to go. So it is not a bad idea in this particular instance.
Okay. Well, it's funny too, Isaiah, because we talked about this in one of our calls last week. I forget which one, but the whole thing of with the client, they had a tool and it was going kind of slow, And then, I asked if we were using the set batch lines to -1, and because the thing that we were doing was in a loop, and we had a sleep, right? Well, it was a built-in sleep. That's where this gets back to, hey, what you're doing, if it's 40,000 times or whatever, it matters.
It
But when
matters.
you're talking about something that's, one-off or not that frequent, it's fine.
Okay.
What I would get the chance to kind of like remind people, I have mentioned this before, but this is a really good example where it is called a guard clause might help you out a lot, which means, let me, instead of me just talking, let me share my screen for a second.
We're talking about a timer, aren't we, to pull the screen every 5 seconds?
This works with anything. So let's say that you have a set timer, action, I don't know, 250. Let me refresh this real quick. Refresh my, so I still have that issue. I haven't fixed it. So here we go. You have a set timer, and I think, my action, 250 milliseconds return, and the action is going to perform a bunch of things, right? Mm-hmm. Before performing a bunch of things, you might have a guard clause, which is if same window, return. That means that I will not do anything if the window hasn't changed. Okay. One way to do this is that whenever you do your stuff, you save information about which window you are, like last window.
Current window and last window,
right,
equals the current window, then return.
Right, exactly. So basically what is going on here is that I'm checking whether so if the last window that I processed, when I come back, if the last window is exactly the same as the current window, then don't do anything else. And there's something just to check. Win active. So
there's also if the window's not active, bail out as well, because there's no point messing about.
Exactly. So basically that you're getting my point. So what is going on is that I get the current window, check if it is the same as the last one that I actually worked with. So at the end of doing my stuff, I just saved my current window into the last window. And that way, this is this you're going to use very often. You get the current window, check, do a lot of things. And after I do them, save my current window into last window. When I come back 250 milliseconds later, I get the current window. And if they're the same, don't do anything because we're in the same location. And that saves, that makes it efficient in the sense of I'm not going to spend computing power doing anything. If I'm in the same position, I don't have to change anything. So that's a good idea in this particular instance. And that's what is called a guard clause. This clause here stops the script of doing stuff that I don't need if I don't need to do them.
Now, at the moment, I'm putting if statements in the GUI that the button won't get displayed if the screen is not the appropriate screen.
Right.
However, is it possible to gray it out rather than not display it?
Yeah, you can use the disable.
It's just a can you show me where I put it? Because
you can use the GUI control command for that. So let me open the documentation here. So if you go to GUI control, you can use the subcommand disable. So you would say GUI control disable and the ID of the control. And instead of hiding it or showing it, what you're doing is just making it grayed out. And you can then later on, if it is the correct screen, use the enable command to make it available. When they're grayed out, you cannot interact with them at all.
So the controls I'm using are actually JPEGs or PNGs I click on. They're not actually buttons.
No, but the picture control can be disabled as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got to basically reprogram the button toolbar, the toolbar to get the control ID of each.
Right, and the
picture
control ID, remember that it's just the variable name. So if you have, say, for example, GUI add button, my button.
Yeah, it's my button.
Okay, right. So
Yeah.
if I do that, GUI show, return, F1.
But even if it's a picture,
Control.
it's
But
picture.
even
it's
if
not
it is
button.
a picture, it's gonna do the same. So,
Yeah, exactly.
that is, I'm just making this because I don't have a picture
Yeah.
that I could use right now. But if you show this GUI, if you press F1, it will make it grayed out like that.
Can
right?
you do this without, if you go back to the script,
Mhm.
can you program it into the initial add button line?
Yes, you can.
So
start
you
off
don't
with
have to go.
saying- Right.
No, what I'm saying is, if you can add a trinary, you know, you can do a question mark,
Mhm,
true or
yep.
false, colon thingy. If this variable is 1, disable it. If this variable 1, enable it. And then every time it's drawn, you don't have to go through GUI control. Every time it draws the bar, it'll do it.
Yes, so you can use a variable.
Yeah.
That has the status for a command. And if you put disable, well, I think disabled in this case, disabled and a variable right next to it, it will do it depending on what you have there. So if I say this one is not disabled,
yeah,
right? And if I make it a 1 here,
it will be disabled.
It would be disabled. So
now,
yes.
if you're forcing, if that line was forcing the, I use a force the expression % at the beginning of that.
Right, then you would have disabled like this. So you would have
fine.
your
It's standard.
expression.
Yeah,
Right,
standard.
this is a standard thing, right? So
Okay.
you would have the variable outside of the string.
Because
However,
that might make it easier for me than to mess about with GUI control, because I redraw the toolbar every time it changes screens.
Mhm. No worries, but in general, I think that is perfectly so it creates, so what you're saying is that you're creating the new so create GUI new, right?
Yes.
So main new, and whenever you, so let's make this hotkey up here, F1, every time you call your function or method or whatever you're calling,
yeah,
you create the variable again.
Correct.
The only thing that changes is the variable that probably sometimes is 0, sometimes is 1.
Correct. Now, if the variable, for instance, has 6 different permutations depending on 6 different screens, okay, is there a way that I can code that that's more efficient? Because at the moment I've got it as a string, you know, home, contact, charts, inbox, that kind of stuff.
I didn't understand the question.
Okay, so I have a string at the moment that comes out at the end that tells me what screen I'm on.
Okay, yes. And you could use that screen to
so it's a variable that contains, yeah, I'm trying to,
no, so yeah.
It's only 1 or 0.
Oh, it's only one. Oh, okay, yeah. So if it is only 1 or 0, you can use that variable to do exactly
it's not.
what I'm.
My apologies. Var can only be 1 or 0.
Right. Yes. In this case, for using the disabled, could only be 1 or 0. So what you're asking for is,
I'll put as an in string. Just put an in string there of
right,
the variable.
in string. Yes, that's correct. So what you can do is in string
variable.
var, and then, for example, home, right? So now what is going to happen is, if this has the word screen, well, you have to do the opposite of it, right?
Yeah, so not, you can put not in
right,
there.
Not in there, because if it doesn't have the word home, it would be disabled.
Correct.
Right, so no, sorry. At this point, I want this button to be enabled if it has the word screen in it. Is that what you want to do?
For instance, yes.
For example, let's say home. So
yeah,
if it has home, I don't want it disabled. That's the reason why I'm putting a not in here.
Correct.
Because disabled should be the opposite of it, because that's the
And that
actual
makes
one
it, from a programming point of view, makes it nice and clean.
Just curious. I mean, is enabled a thing?
I don't think so. So let me go ahead and
It'd
do.
be so much easier to understand.
Right, I understand. Yeah, totally correct in your assessment there. So if I say button controls, like I think I have to go to the GUI.
So it's either disabled 0 or disabled 1, but you can't ever enable 0, enabled 1. Is that what you're
I
talking?
don't, yeah, exactly. So you can only use the word disabled. You do not have enabled, right? Which
Okay.
is interesting because they are enabled by default, right?
And to confirm, because I see it here too, it's not like other things with AutoHotkey where you can use a 0 or basically anything, right? It's a 0 or a 1. You couldn't put.
No, I think if you put on, for example, var, it contains something. Let me see if that works out. I think that should disable it. That's what I'm expecting.
Because
right
it's not a 0, because it's got something in it.
It has something in it. I would assume that that would count as a 1. So where is it? Ah, F1. Oh, it's not disabled. So it has to be a 0 or a 1, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
which in this case, for anybody who knows what that does.
Not. What does that mean?
Yeah, I will explain what it
Means
means.
you're on the bad list for Santa. You've been naughty.
Ah,
No, so basically, let me explain what happens. So if you have a variable with text, right?
Yep.
And you message box that, you would have text. If you put it as a not, that would return the number 0, right? That would always return 0, whether it has text or not. So let's say that it is blank, right?
hang on, I'm confused. You're asking it to, why are you putting?
It's not equal to nothing.
Right.
No, hang on. The message box is displaying the result
right.
of but you're telling it variable equals 0. Not.
Let's make it like this so that you don't get very confused on that one.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Fine.
right. So now, here's the thing. If I message box that, it would show me the word test.
Correct. Yes.
If I do not, that actually makes the opposite of what it has.
Okay.
But it returns a number. It returns 0. Okay.
Okay.
Now, as it returned the opposite of it, that is incorrect, because I do have something, it should be a 1.
Okay.
So if I do not, again, that will become a 1. Now, here's the thing. When you use this, when you want to convert whatever you have in there, if it is text, you want to convert it into a 0 or a 1.
A binary. Yeah.
A binary. So I'm just converting whatever is there to a 0 or a 1. And if it is empty, it's going to be a 0. If it is text, it's not going to give me the text. It's going to give me the number 1. It's going to tell me, yeah, it's true.
You know what? Knowing this would have really helped me earlier this morning, but I used an in-string function.
Right. That's the reason why you use the in-string function, because you figure out, okay, let me verify. But hold on, be careful. This does not tell you if it has a specific string. So in your case, you might be needing to use the in-string. Right. But in this case, it just converts text into a 1. Yeah. That's what it's doing. So that
converts anything, because it could be
anything. Yeah. It could
well,
be
I was looking for whether it was empty or not. I didn't care what was in it. So this would have been spot on, because when I was sending text to it, it didn't come up as it wasn't working. So I made sure that I used the in-string function, and rather than looking for empty as in 0, I was looking for a particular string that I preset it. Rather than zeroing it out, I gave it the word error and then made sure that error wasn't in it.
But in general, in this case, these usually converts anything you put here into a 1 or a 0, in effectively telling you, yes, there is a value, or no, there is no value.
That's and if you put a 0 there,
right? If it is a 0, it's going to give you a 0.
Okay. Let's see.
What about two inverted commas? That should work as well. That's a 0.
Yeah, that would be a 0. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it definitely is telling you there is a value there or not. And this is only useful when you have strings of text and you don't need the string of text. You just want to verify if there's something
if it's
in it.
empty or not.
Right.
So-
And basically you can say if var message box true, but sometimes you don't want to use an if statement for that. That's the case
So,
where you don't want
tell
it.
me, if var not equals inverted commas.
Like
yes.
this?
Yes.
Yeah,
Now
that should work. Yeah, that
Now-
that would give you true there.
However, if var was sorry, if that was empty,
Yeah, that would be else message box false. That would be false.
that would work as well, would it?
No, hold on. No, so it is equal to that. So let me
Yes.
remove it.
No. Inverted commas, two inverted commas at the top.
So the problem is that it is not. Oh, hold on. I know what is going on. I have to use the the parentheses there.
Oh, okay.
Right. So remember that AutoHotkey by default version 1
Yeah.
treats this as text, but right now the variable is that. So that's the problem. Sorry. So if you use the parentheses there, you're forcing an expression and you're telling it if it is not empty.
And that's the other thing that I had to work out this morning the hard way.
Yeah. And that's the reason why sometimes I just don't want to deal with the if statements and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I just make a message box with var and then just nod it 2 times.
Yes.
And that should do the trick for it's a one-liner. And now it just tells me if it is empty or not. It's a very shorthand way to do the if statement in this particular instance.
And it's very, very helpful because you're messing around with
And again,
numbers versus
right. And
strings.
again, this converts it into a 0 or a 1, which I made use in the example that we were doing. Disabled only uses 0 or 1. So I could just go ahead and convert that into a 0 or a 1 very quickly.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody found that helpful, but this is something that
I did. But that was by the by. I've already sailed past that ship and dealt with it other ways,
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah.
The other one, which I always, say is if you're using an if statement, use parens always. Just
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
And notice you're forcing an expression. So if you're saying, hey, always use a parenthesis there, is because it is better to have an expression. That's the reason why in V2, everything is an expression. It's better to have expressions. You know what to expect. In this case, yeah, it was a little bit weird when I tried it and it gave me the wrong answer. Oh yeah, it's because that is normal text. Oh yeah, I need an expression. It's annoying.
All right. Anyone else got any? By the way, also, if you haven't already seen it, Guy, the shell hooks stuff, using I can't remember if it's a class or just functions that Jackie used in that video. It is a really powerful tool to be able to see what's going on without going crazy, because shell hooks themselves are fairly complicated.
Give me a minute, please.
Nature calls.
Anyone else have anything they're working on?
Thank you.
I have one, Joe. I just don't know if you can tell me if we have to wait for Isaiah. My issue, I'm trying to do put multiple pieces of information into a text file and pull it up anytime I want my program, and each time it's a different file.
Brian, before you keep going, I don't know if you're moving in and out, but your audio is jumping up and down, so it's just kind of hard to follow.
Oh, I don't have a headset, so I'll have to move it closer to my mic.
That's it, and keep still. That's lovely, because we can understand what you said.
Well, it just comes in and out. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, my issue, let me try this again. My issue is I'm trying to do multiple pieces of data into arrays. I'm just trying to figure out if that's a more efficient way of doing it, rather than having multiple arrays that I have to put the main array into after I load the notepad into the notepad information, the text file. I'm loading a text file onto the way. My question is there a more efficient way of doing that?
Well,
Rather than putting it into like 10 different ways.
can you share an example, or it'll just it's hard to comment on it without seeing, what you're doing.
Okay, give me a second.
No problem. He was talking about reading. It sounded like, and that's what I wasn't sure how. The text file is a notepad, it sounds like, but I don't know the structure of the text in the file. And then reading them into arrays, and he's just wondering of an efficient way to do it. But
Well, I would say regular expressions or chat AI, chat GPT. You just give it a file and say, hey, give me a way to structure this file. That's the only way. But in general, before chat GPT, I would have used regular expressions, right? That's what you would use a regular expression for.
I think, well, again, to me, we got to see what the data is, right? And because, if
I could go ahead and give you an idea of where to start with that if I see the data, because I could tell you whether a regular expression might catch that. But in general, if you're looking for always a specific type of thing, you can use regular expressions. It might get very complex, but that's the way to go.
That's the other. I mean, he also mentioned the most efficient. So
regular expressions, actually, I was surprised about certain situations in which
But if you don't know regex,
no, it's gonna take a long.
Right.
No, but this is definitely
how your data is structured.
No, but this is structured already, and so what is it that you're looking for? I think, yeah.
I just go with the names for privacy reasons.
Sure.
What this does is the first column loads. It loads the name of the scene that it's going to be. The second one tells me what part it is, so that when I'm live, I can be changing stuff around. If for some reason it's not what I thought it was going to be, so I can be doing that on the fly. The third part tells me the lower thirds, the name of whoever the person is. The fourth part tells me whatever their title is going into the meeting. So I'm ready. This is a OBS controller, and it also handles my lower thirds. However, if you look at give me a second so I can pull up the right part. This is one heck of a big file. But what it does, give me 1 second. I'm trying to find the file.
You can use the Control F and search for a word. Yeah.
What'd you say? Control F?
Control F. Yeah.
Oh, F. So I'm like,
yeah, like what the hell? Oh my God. Yeah. So,
okay, so right now how I have it set up is it actually goes through and breaks it down. But if I am trying to get over COVID, sorry. If I'm trying to do it, I actually have to break it down. Then we break it down. As you can see, I am actually looping through the first file to create the second, and it's a mess. Let's be honest.
I know. I understand your pain.
So,
but here's the thing, my man. Yeah. There's two situations here. What you're doing is the way to go. You have to do it this way. But there is another way. You can use a CSV file and use the loop CSV. Okay. So you can use either a tab delimited file or a comma delimited file. What you're doing is basically the same thing that you would do with the CSV. The problem is that you're doing it manually, while AutoHotkey might have something built in to help you with that. That's all there is to it. But what you're doing is basically the way to go. I wouldn't have done it any other ways. And let me, I would have simplified it a little bit, which is probably what you're asking for.
Yeah. Well,
Let
I
me-
went on Discord to the AutoHotkey community because I don't have access to their program. So I can't link to you guys. And they had a suggestion that if I put this in a certain way in the actual text file, which I don't mind changing how I do the text file to make it more understandable for anyone else that's not me, then I can say, okay, the name equals this, the title equals this, the theme equals this, and then pull it in differently.
Okay,
But
let me show you a quick example of what I would have done in that case. Okay.
Yeah, I'm for sharing my screen, Isaias.
Okay. Yeah.
Just showing when I have a flat file that has delimited data, I just use the for, so you could read it in, and then I use a for loop. I first loop over the line breaks, right?
Exactly.
And then this
You
just
have to
gets the
loop
header
through.
row. This is my default template, right? So
Right.
I often just come in and delete stuff that I don't need.
Right.
So I'll get rid of that and that. And actually all of this is just logic that, like, depending on the data,
Right.
this
What
case
I want to do.
here, this actually updates my system tray icon. So we don't
Yeah.
need that. And this is just showing now my data is tab delimited. So this would directly access the first thing, the first, the
Mhm.
row, or excuse me, column. And then I'm displaying it with the tab. But what I love about stir split is you don't actually have to store it in a variable. You can access them
Right.
directly. So this, and actually the mod is this is another one, like I said, I have in my template where, hey, what if you want to skip every 10th one or every 5th one? If I want to skip every 5th one, I would just put a 5 here, right? So it comes in handy at times. It's just I can never remember it. So that you don't need. Let me see if actually this will run. It'll probably run on the other screen. Did it run? What?
Yeah, you have to save it.
Yeah, sorry.
Did it?
I don't know what.
Are you calling the function? Oh no, yeah, it's not a function. Okay.
Function.
All right.
Anyway, I know this is
Right.
just fine.
Let me
Yeah,
let me see if I
can.
could, because I'm trying to get kind of like a little example going, and basically similar to what you just did. The only thing is that I could convert the data into an object right away. So let me share my screen real quick. Minimize this, minimize that. And here we go. So this is basically how you are going about it, right? So you have kind of like data that is delimited by the ampersands here. And you can, as Joe just mentioned, you can just say for each, or so you can, for each line in string split, and you have file. And the first split that I'm going to be doing is on new lines. So I'm just going to say new lines here. And I could ignore this if I needed to. Now, this is the part that I was going to say. So message box line. This would give me each line by itself. You see that? So it's going line by line. Now that I have it line by line, I can split these on the ampersands. So I would say split that into data called string split data on the ampersands, and that would give me all the things. And now I will create an object. So this is like my organized data. for data one. So data one would be the header. So that would be main, the word main. And all the other parts of this would be the data. So I would put the whole thing in there. I don't know. I don't really care. I'm just going to show you what it does. In the end, it does that for me. And now organized data main will show me just that one line. So let me see, hold on. Let me verify this first. Let me see what happens there. Yeah, it did main. That was one. That is main.
Did you
Probably
create the object
yeah,
first?
I have to create the object.
Yeah.
But I have a second example where I have a nested loop and it's structuring it, and that exactly why I have a template for it, because I
Right.
always forget to.
Yeah, but notice that it didn't give me an error, which should have. But yeah, here's the thing. Now I can call any line I want by name. So if I want the hymn here, it would give me just that thing. So again, I could convert this thing into an object if I wanted to, and I could split this thing as well into different parts of that object. But again, you're doing this manually. You have to do it manually. So what you're doing is basically the way to go. It's just that you can simplify it a little bit by splitting it like this later on. So
to me, when you keep going through and put each one into the object this way, it's much easier to read and to understand than what we saw on yours, Brian. And like, I'm not knocking it. It's just, to me, I can study this and go, oh, I get what's going where.
Right. It would just create the object automatically for me. And then later on, I can call parts of the objects in different ways. I would say what you're doing is the end goal. It's just that you are performing a lot of actions that probably you don't need. That's all there is to it. Because it would do it for you when you are split like I'm doing. But the main concept is you have to first split on new lines and then split on the ampersands. And that's going to give you each thing by itself.
Okay.
There was a question in the chat here, and it said, I just tried using clipboard to store a file address. So just, I assume meaning a path. This is the part that throws me in save as, and that's where I don't understand how you're saying you're storing it in the save as, I assume. And then he says he went to paste it back into the file address in open, and it says the file address not found.
Okay, I understand. I think I understand what he's trying to say.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I use paths all the time for files in open and save dialogues.
right, and that's perfectly, it works just fine. But let me see. Let me try something out real quick to see if I understand exactly what he meant. So he had something. Let's open any script. Doesn't matter. Sorry. Yeah, let's open this guy here. So what you are saying probably is that you had a save as dialog like this, and you copied the path from somewhere. You have to copy it from here on the top, okay? If you just copy this part, it's not going to work. But if you copy this, copy, close it, and now use an open dialog, you can paste that path here and say open, and it should open if you're using the correct thing, because this is expecting a file, right? So this is open file. And if you just put a path to a folder, it's not going to work. But if I use the open folder one, and I put that path there, and I hit enter, it will work just fine. So it depends what type of open dialog you have. If it is a file open dialog, you need to put the full path to a file. If it is a folder, you can put a path to a folder.
If you put
So-
if you put the path to the folder when it's expecting a file, it'll navigate to that folder, and then you've got to select the file.
That's not always true, but yes. So right now, what happened to me is if I'm using the open file, so
And
let me check. So let me change the location
Okay,
Out of the
because I think you're right. So if I put the path to a folder
and
there,
hit open.
it would
and
open, yeah, it would open that location. Yes, that's right.
Yes,
Right. And then it will allow you to select the file manually.
correct. I've got a follow up on the double exclamation marks. If you've got a moment on this call.
Yeah, but
It looks like a browser thing, right?
there's
So
more
he's-
follow up on the question, which I put it in the chat.
Right, so probably I saw the chat here, the save as has a file address accessible by Control L. And when I use send Control C to copy the file address and store in the clipboard, I want to paste the variable on open. Now, hold on. What is the part that is not working? The pasting?
Yeah, do you check your clipboard to see what's actually in the clipboard?
Right,
Like, is it
make a
valid?
message box first
Yeah.
of the clipboard to see if the clipboard contains what you think is containing.
Right.
Second of all, confirm if what is failing is the paste or
Right,
the open, because pasting into
Yeah.
the open is done. I think John has a way of
Yeah.
doing that with this particular window. So when you have an open wind dialog, this here, you can paste to that using a specific way.
There's
which
a
is-
control. There's a control name for it that you can just send
Yes,
it to that control.
Right.
Yeah.
So right now, what I was just going to do is we use the Windows Spy to get the control name, and you will see that it says edit
Edit
one
one.
for this class of Windows. So I could send information to that control that way, or you can just try to use the paste command there, because when you open it,
use all
it
the
starts there.
Yeah,
Right.
by default, the cursor's already there
It's
when you
already
open
there,
this.
so you can
Yeah.
actually try to paste. If it is not pasting it, it's probably because your clipboard does not have that information, might be.
Or an admin, you're running things at admin and it's not allowing it to paste.
Oh, you had that issue too, yeah, that's right.
Just to throw the spanner in the works.
Right, yeah, that can happen.
so he says the content gets pasted, but the computer flashes an error saying the file address is not found. I'd still say you got to study, we got to,
The clipboard, you can look at the clipboard and see what's in it.
No, so
Look at
he
the path.
pasted something, the path that you're
Right.
pasting.
but there's probably something missing.
Or for example, let me do this real quick, because it might happen that if you paste, you told me that you use Control L to find something, and probably the path that you're getting is something like this, file path like C and those kind of things. I'm not really sure if that type of link would work. Oh yeah, it does. So I'm not really sure why you're getting that error there, but you have to, if you can copy or paste an example next time, because we only have a minute now, but next time you can paste an example or send us an information, we could probably answer that question. But it seems to be that is about what is being pasted is in an incorrect format, looks like.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. We got to jump on to the Heroes Hour. Hope you have a great New Year's, and we'll see you next week, hopefully.
Bye,
care.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.